I stood there, in uniform boots polished to a mirror shine, heart pounding in my chest, while my father's voice echoed through my phone speaker on full volume. You think you're too good for us now? After everything I've done, he snapped. A fellow officer from the local PD stood just a few feet away, watching me carefully, waiting for my response. Watching me carefully, waiting for my response. My husband, Evan, was behind me, silent and tense. In that moment, a realization hit me harder than any training exercise ever could. This was never about the money, it was about control, and I was finally done giving it to him. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. I'd love to know who's part of our community today. The text message was sitting there, glowing on my kitchen counter. I need $16,000 for your sister's wedding. No hello, no how was your graduation, just a number. A demand for $16,000 from a man who hadn't spoken to me in months. My husband, Evan, read the screen and let out a quiet breath that said more than any words could. He didn't ask what I was going to do. He knew the old Natalie would have panicked. He knew the old Natalie would have started calculating how to make it work, how to earn that fleeting moment of approval. But that version of me was buried under the gravel of the Academy parade field, where they never showed up. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why he thought I owed him a cent. I simply picked up my phone and opened my banking app. My fingers were steady, my breathing rhythmic and slow. Just like on the firing range, I didn't hesitate for a single second. I typed in the recipient's name. I entered the amount, not 16,000, not even 1,000. I typed in $16, exactly 0.1% of what he had demanded. In the memo line, where most people write for the wedding or love you, I typed 2 words, best wishes. I hit send and watched the confirmation screen pop up. The transaction was complete. This was my final symbolic severance, a paper trail that marked the end of my debt. Seconds later, I flagged his account in my security settings and locked down my digital assets to ensure he could never use our transaction history as a backdoor into my life. I felt a strange sense of clarity, like a heavy fog had finally lifted from my vision. This wasn't a family dispute anymore, it was an audit. I turned to Evan. He was still watching me, waiting for the fallout. I didn't give him a breakdown, I gave him an order. Evan, I need you to do me a favor, I said, my voice as level as a horizon line. Go to the hardware store. Buy the best deadbolts they have. I want every single lock on this house changed before tonight. He didn't ask why. He didn't tell me I was being dramatic or that I should reconsider. He just grabbed his keys and nodded. For years, my family had treated my life like an open door policy. They walked in when they wanted something and walked out when they were bored. That subscription had just expired. My compassion had been a luxury they'd overdrafted for years, and today, the account was closed. Permanent finality. I wasn't just locking a door, I was canceling their access to my peace of mind. I set the phone face down on the granite. I knew the storm was coming. I knew that $16 would feel like a slap to a man who measured love in bank balances, but I also knew that for the first time in 27 years, I was the one holding the keys. I went back to my coffee, the silence of the house feeling earned rather than empty. I was no longer a silent investor in their version of family. I was a sovereign state, and my borders were officially closed. I stood in the kitchen, and my mind drifted back to the parade field in Salem just a few weeks ago. The sun was high and unforgiving, the kind of sharp light that makes every detail look too real. My uniform was pressed to perfection, and my badge felt like a lead weight on my chest, heavy with the pride I had earned through months of blood, sweat, and absolute discipline. I was a state trooper now. I had made it. But as I stood in formation, eyes locked forward, I was doing something I shouldn't have been doing. I was counting sections in the bleachers. Section 1, Section 2, Section 3. I knew exactly where they were supposed to be. I had mailed a physical letter weeks earlier, including a hand-drawn map. I had highlighted the front row on the left side in bright yellow ink. I had called my father Kenneth twice to confirm. The last time, he had sighed into the phone like my graduation was a tedious chore on a long to-do list. Yeah, we'll see, Natalie, he had said. We'll see. When we were given a brief break, I let my eyes scan the crowd for just a second. I saw mothers clutching damp tissues and fathers standing tall with quiet, fierce pride. I heard a girl next to me whisper, "There they are," her voice cracking with pure relief. I looked at the yellow highlighted section. It was a void, just empty wood and cold air where my family was supposed to be. For 27 years, I had lived in a prison without bars. In my training, I learned the term for it, learned helplessness. It's what happens when you're systematically taught that your efforts won't change your outcome. I had spent my entire life trying to be the good daughter, the reliable one, hoping that if I just achieved enough, they would finally show up. But that day, as I stood there in my dress blues, the truth hit me with the force of a high-speed collision. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a background character. Later that night, I scrolled through my half-sister Claire's social media. There they were. Kenneth and my stepmother, Stephanie, were at a rooftop bar downtown. They were wearing custom t-shirts to celebrate Claire's influencer launch party. Stephanie was glowing, holding a martini and pointing at a banner with Claire's face on it. Kenneth was grinning, looking more proud of Claire's new follower count than he had ever been of my academy honors. They hadn't been busy. They hadn't hit traffic. They had looked at the map I sent, looked at the date of my ceremony, and decided that Claire's vanity project was more important than my life's work. I sat on the edge of my bed that night, staring at my polished boots, and realized that my uniform could protect the public, but it couldn't protect me from the people who were supposed to love me. I was a state trooper, but in my own home, I was still just an invisible girl. That was the day the invisible chains finally snapped. I've come to realize that in my father's eyes, I was never truly a daughter. I was a business asset, a high-yield investment he'd been trying to liquidate for years. I called it the family tax. It was the price I paid just for the privilege of not being yelled at. When I was 20, I won a $12,000 merit scholarship. It was supposed to be my ticket to a debt-free degree. But Kenneth didn't see a proud achievement. He saw money that could buy Claire a used Jeep because she was stressed about her influencer engagement rates. He took the money, promised to pay it back, and then laughed when I asked for the first installment. He told me I was being selfish. He said that family looks out for each other, which really meant I look out for him and he looks out for Claire. This was the trap of normalization. When you live in a house where cruelty is served for breakfast, you start to think the bitterness is just part of the flavor. I had been socialized to accept that my needs were secondary to their wants. Kenneth operated on a principle of narcissistic utility. If I wasn't being useful, I was being a burden. Every dollar I earned was a dollar he felt entitled to. When I finally bought my house with Evan, Kenneth insisted on contributing $2,000 for the closing costs. I didn't want it. I knew the price would be too high, and I was right. For 3 years, he used those $2,000 as a master key to my life. He'd show up unannounced, criticizing my lawn, telling me how to run my household, and reminding me that his money was in these walls. I paid him back $3,000, a 50% interest rate on his forced generosity, just to buy my silence. But to a man like him, the balance sheet is never settled. And now, the $16,000 demand. He wanted me to foot the bill for Claire's destination wedding, while I was still paying off the loans I had to take out because he pilfered my scholarship. He wanted me to fund a celebration for his sister who hadn't even texted me to say congratulations on my badge. It was the same old accounting trick, my labor, her luxury. But standing in my kitchen, looking at that $16 transfer, I realized I had finally balanced the books. My compassion had been a resource they depleted until the soil was dust. There were no more credits to give. The utility was officially offline. I wasn't the reliable one anymore. I was the one who had finally stopped paying for a life I wasn't allowed to live. The sound of the key scraping against the lock was the first sign. It was frantic, followed by a hard kick that vibrated through the front door. I watched through the peephole as Kenneth's face turned a shade of crimson I had never seen before. He wasn't just angry, he was losing his grip. He pounded on the wood, shouting about his rights and his money, but I didn't open the door. I just walked back into the living room and muted my phone. Then the digital storm hit. My phone screen lit up with notifications like a frantic heartbeat. Stephanie had posted a long, rambling status on Facebook about how I had abandoned the family that raised me. She used a photo of me from high school, looking awkward and small, with a caption saying that some people forget who fed them when they put on a uniform. Claire was even worse. She posted a story to her 50,000 followers, crying without actual tears, calling me a cold-blooded traitor who had stolen her wedding joy. The old me would have been devastated. I would have drafted 1,000 explanations, trying to prove my innocence, but my training had taught me how to identify a threat. This wasn't a family argument. It was a psychological smear campaign. I didn't post a rebuttal. I didn't argue in the group chat. I simply took screenshots of every single message and saved them to a secure cloud drive. I called Gregory that afternoon. He was an old school real estate attorney who looked at the world through the lens of titles and deeds. I didn't give him the drama. I gave him the numbers. I told him I needed a full forensic audit of the closing costs for my house from 3 years ago. I wanted to know where every single cent had come from. I also asked him to look into the small inheritance my mother had allegedly left behind. The one Kenneth claimed was only $2,000. I'm on it, Natalie, Gregory said, his voice as dry as parchment. If there is a paper trail, I will find it. People like your father usually leave a mess behind them. I hung up and felt the silence return to my home. The smear campaign was just noise. My father thought he was attacking me, but he was actually just providing me with evidence of harassment. I went back to my tactical manuals, my mind already moving 3 steps ahead. This wasn't about a wedding anymore. It was about dismantling a decade of lies, one document at a time. Gregory's voice on the phone was as thin as the paper he lived for. Natalie, you need to come to my office. I found the ghost you were looking for. When I arrived, the air in the room smelled like old folders and the bitter scent of a truth 10 years in the making. Gregory didn't waste time with small talk. He simply slid a manila folder across the mahogany desk toward me. I dug into the life insurance policy your mother left behind, he began, his eyes fixed on me. Your father told you there was only $2,000 left after the administrative expenses. He was lying. Gregory pointed to a scanned document from a decade ago. It was a payout authorization for $150,000. My breath hitched, not out of sadness, but out of the sheer clinical shock of the numbers. $150,000. I looked at the bottom of the page. There it was, my signature, Natalie Henderson. But as a state trooper trained to spot the smallest discrepancies, the lines looked like a crime scene. The curves were too sharp. The pressure of the pen was too heavy, like someone trying too hard to be someone they weren't. It was Kenneth's handwriting. He had forged my name when I was only 18 years old. He had bypassed the mandatory verification by using a corrupt notary friend from his old business circle who was willing to witness my signature while I wasn't even in the room. He emptied the account within 48 hours of the check clearing, Gregory said, tapping a bank statement. That $2,000 he supposedly contributed to your house closing? It wasn't his, Natalie. It was yours. He didn't help you. He gave you a crumb of the loaf he had already stolen from your hands. He's been using your mother's death to fund his failed business and Claire's lifestyle for 10 years. I stared at the forged ink until my vision blurred. For a decade, I had felt guilty for not being grateful enough. I had carried the weight of a debt that didn't exist. Now, the internal ledger was finally clear. This wasn't a family dispute. It was grand larceny. My father hadn't just been cold. He had been a predator, waiting for my mother's heart to stop so he could pick my pockets. I felt a surge of lethal precision. My father thought he was the one in control, but he had left a trail of digital blood that a forensic audit could track across state lines. The family tax wasn't just unfair, it was a felony. And because of the discovery rule, the statute of limitations only began the moment I saw that folder today, making his decade-old crime a very present legal nightmare. I closed the folder with a snap that sounded like a pair of handcuffs clicking shut. My mother's ghost was finally speaking through these documents, and she was demanding justice. I looked at Gregory and gave him the only instruction that mattered. Prepare the criminal referral. I want every cent back with interest, or I want him in a cell. I formally submitted the evidence to the district attorney's financial crimes unit. I knew that as a trooper, I had to ensure the investigation was handled by the book to avoid any conflict of interest. I stood there in uniform, my boots polished to a mirror shine, heart pounding in my chest while my father's voice echoed through my phone speaker on full volume. You think you're too good for us now? After everything I've done, he snapped. A fellow trooper stood just a few feet away, watching me carefully, waiting for my response. My husband, Evan, was behind me, silent and tense. Kenneth had done the unthinkable. He had called my own colleagues to my doorstep, reporting me for elder abuse and property theft just because I had revoked his access to my life. He stood on my lawn, acting the part of the distraught, abandoned father, pointing at my house as if it were a crime scene he owned. But I didn't reach for my holster or my anger. I reached for the folder Gregory had prepared. The air felt crisp, the morning sun glinting off my badge, but inside I was absolute zero. I stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind me to protect the peace I had built. I didn't look at Kenneth. I looked directly at Officer Miller, a man I'd shared coffee with during night shifts. I handed him the manila envelope. Officer, here is the title and mortgage for this property, solely in my name, I said, my voice clinical and rhythmic. And here is the criminal referral our attorney filed this morning. Miller's eyes scanned the pages, stopping on the scanned life insurance payout and the blatant forgery of my signature. I watched the realization dawn on him. He wasn't looking at a dispute. He was looking at $150,000 of grand larceny. The power flip was instantaneous. Kenneth's smug, victimized expression curdled into something gray and hollow as the second officer stepped toward him, not me. The threats of consequences vanished, replaced by the stuttering, high-pitched pleas of a man who realized his cash cow had just turned into his prosecutor. He started to babble about family mistakes and temporary loans, but I cut him off with the same finality as a gavel. This isn't a family matter anymore, Kenneth, I said, the words placing themselves where they needed to land. This is accounting. I've already sent you $16. Consider that the final settlement for 27 years of being your utility. Kenneth looked at the handcuffs on Miller's belt and began to beg, but his voice sounded like static in the background of my new life. I turned around and walked back inside, the quiet click of the new deadbolt being the only sound I needed to hear. I wasn't abandoning anyone. I was simply auditing a bankrupt relationship and finding exactly 0 reasons to reinvest. Claire's dream wedding didn't just lose its luster, it completely imploded. Without the $150,000 Kenneth had stolen from my mother, and with the heavy weight of looming criminal charges, his entire house of cards collapsed. The vendors remained unpaid, and the influencer lifestyle Claire had carefully curated turned into a digital graveyard of deleted posts and bankruptcy filings. She found out the hard way that when the money runs out, the followers do too. I didn't keep a single cent of that recovered money. The legal battle for full restitution would take months, perhaps years, but the court had already frozen his assets. I formally pledged every dollar of those future funds to a cause that actually mattered. Every dollar went into the founding of a new scholarship specifically for police recruits who come from toxic or abusive backgrounds. I want to ensure that no other officer has to stand on that parade field looking at empty bleachers and feeling like they are worth nothing more than their bank balance. This is the justice of the planter. I chose to grow something beautiful in the soil they tried to poison. I've come to realize that boundaries aren't just walls built to keep people out. They are the doors we use to protect the peace we have fought to build. Blood might define your origin, but true family is a choice you make based on dignity and kindness. You do not owe your life or your labor to people who only see you as a utility or a financial resource. Real family is about the people who show up for you, not just the ones who demand you show up for them. If you find yourself in a similar situation, remember that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Reclaiming your own narrative is the most powerful revolution you can lead. If this story moved you or made you feel seen, please share it and subscribe. We're just getting started on this journey of reclaiming our power. Leave a comment. Have you ever had to choose between your family and your sanity? I'm listening.